Hey, what's up, everybody? We are back. It is Syracuse football postgame presented by Krause Health, live here on the Syracuse Orange Football Facebook page, live on YouTube and on Twitter as well. And second time we've been with you today, did an unexpected postgame show following the Syracuse-Bryant basketball game, a game marred by ejections, fights, people taking swings at each other, and a buzzer beater that lifted Bryant over Syracuse 73-72. Here we are on the heels of a football game that Syracuse won. They overcame 13 penalties against Boston College and Chestnut Hill, rattled off 26 unanswered points, and Syracuse avoids a major crash by now finishing the season 7-5, snapping a 5-game losing streak, winning the game 32-23 was the final in Chestnut Hill today. So all that said, folks, the word of the day is undisciplined. I think there's a good comment to start off here from Iris. It says there's something in the water at Syracuse. All the fights today, and we won, so there's that. Jimmy notes, great comeback win, embarrassing ending. Allison notes the officiating there. Joe says the same thing. What are they putting the water up here? I don't know. I got some of that water right here. You guys want to go? You want to go? I just drank some water. Let's go. Here we go. Syracuse woke up today on both fronts and chose violence. And frankly, it was embarrassing. I think that Syracuse athletic director John Wildhack needs to put out a statement. If not tonight, I mean, it's 11:30 on the East Coast. Maybe you let things die down a little bit. But I certainly think he's got to put something out either late tonight, tomorrow, Monday, whatever the case may be, and do everything he can to exemplify that this is not what Syracuse University athletics is about. Okay, the basketball situation, yeah, Judah Mintz got pushed a little bit, but he slapped the guy in the face. You can't do that. I mean, you just can't do that. Syracuse got everything it deserved from that. Ejection-wise, I mean, Justin Taylor had a great game. Jesse Edwards had a great game. The Orange, they got beat by Bryant, and I think that Bryant's coach is an embarrassment. I think not sending players out for the handshake is embarrassing. I think Jim Boeheim was right to call him out on that, but it was an undisciplined day for Syracuse. Football-wise, this team commits 13 penalties in game 12. Guys, it's game 12 of the season, and they had 13 penalties, including a player getting ejected from the game, Enrique Cruz, for throwing punches during the game. I know football is a rough sport. It got chippy out there. It's somewhat of a rivalry game. I know the Boston fans were treating Syracuse fans terribly there. Doesn't matter. You've got to rise above it. You've got to be better than that. And Enrique Cruz starts swinging at people during a game where you've got an offensive line that's banged up. Kalen Ellis goes down, has to leave the game. People are shifting all over the place on the offensive line, and you are taking swings at guys after the game. Now, some Boston College players certainly participated in this. Don't get me wrong. A lot of pushing and shoving on the field after the game, but DeMarcus Adams for Syracuse plants the flag. I don't know if you guys saw this on the TV broadcast afterwards. He took one of those big flags that the cheerleaders use and tried to plant it on the turf at Alumni Stadium. Dino Babers stepped right in. The flag was actually left on the field. He picked it up and carried it into the locker room and tried to break it up a little bit here. But that's embarrassing. I mean, Syracuse, your two front-facing programs embarrassed themselves today. One in how they played, and how they finished the game against Bryant, and, how you represented yourself. And again, I know Bryant was certainly at fault there. But still, I mean, what's the feeling coming away from that? And then the football team goes out there and commits 13 penalties. Now, they rattled off 26 unanswered points. They won the football game. They avoided the embarrassment of becoming just the third team to start 6-0 and finish 6-6. A bowl game awaits, but 13 penalties in game 12. I mean, that sequence at the end of the first half was just mind-boggling to me. And look, they overcame it. They won the game, and they finished 7-5, right? So credit where it's due. Great fourth quarter. Defense came up big with Caleb Okechukwu chasing down Moorhead, the Boston College quarterback. He forces the fumble. Sean Tucker scores. Syracuse gets the ball back again. Sean Tucker scores. BC snuck in a late touchdown to close the gap to 32-23. I'll give you credit for that, to score those 26 unanswered points. But, man, I think what people are coming away from this is Syracuse woke up today and they chose violence. And I hate to laugh because I think a lot of this is embarrassing. And it's not the way you should represent yourself, even in a tough sport. But as Steve notes here, they committed 104 penalties in 12 games. That's the most in the BCS. That's the most in FBS football, is I think what you mean to say there, Steve, right? Yeah, Syracuse is one of the most penalized teams in college football coming into this game. They added 13 to the list, and I would imagine they're going to finish on top of that list, certainly for the regular season. We'll see when they add in bowl games here. But that's the stain of the takeaway from the day. And, man, can you imagine? I mean, I can only imagine what I would be writing for tomorrow and Monday. And I'm still going to be writing some things, certainly, that are not going to be pleasant about what we saw today on both fronts. But if Syracuse had lost tonight in that way, and let's say they don't have the great fourth quarter they do, they continue to be undisciplined. Boston College, a wretched Boston College team, frankly, 3-8, hurting, stumbling down the stretch here with a backup quarterback, lots of injuries. The 131st ranked running game in the country took it to Syracuse for 3 quarters. I don't know if Syracuse just had too much pumpkin pie and stuffing on Thursday, and it took them 3 quarters to wake up from that post-Thanksgiving nap. But the penalty issue, as Mike points out here, has been a problem throughout Dino Babers' tenure. Gets a whole new offensive coaching staff, still no discipline. I can't comprehend having 13 penalties in game 12 of the season. And a bulk of those, a huge bulk of those, are on the offensive line. They're on, and Enrique Cruz took it that next step and was swinging at guys during the game. And I know he's popular with fans. The Enrique Cruz tailgate, that they gave him an NIL deal essentially, and I know they love him, and he's a great player. He looked upset after the game. He knew he screwed up. He knew that he had a problem there. But boy, they won the game, but it still feels like they landed with a thud in a way. But, once this settles through, as Blake brings up here, 7-5, 4-4 in conference play, not bad. What bowl does it look like for us? That's the speculation at this point. Syracuse has been linked to a Gasparilla Bowl appearance in Tampa. They've been linked to the Pinstripe Bowl, of course. Who wouldn't want to see Syracuse play Illinois in the Pinstripe Bowl, for example, the fighting Tommy DeVitos. They've been linked to the Fenway Bowl. They've been linked to the bowl in El Paso. I forget the name of the bowl game off the top of my head, but now that they're 7-5 and they kind of go down the list of bowl games, Clemson lost today to South Carolina. Do they swipe a bowl bid that Syracuse potentially could be in there? You kind of go down the list of schools and, bowl games. There's Sun Bowl. Thank you, Chris. The Sun Bowl is the one in El Paso, hometown of Syracuse defensive coordinator Tony White, by the way. Thank you guys for jumping in on that. So look, they're going to a bowl game. Technically, it's progress. Syracuse won 2 more games than last year. They snapped the losing streak. But to start 6-0 and finish 7-5, it's better than last year, but that's a tough finish there, and you barely got there. Think they're a pass away. They're a play away from contending in the fourth quarter of that Clemson game and going a free fall before, somewhat redeeming themselves in this game today against Boston College. So while you guys go at it here a little bit in the comments and keep things going there, let's go over some numbers from this matchup here. As we mentioned, Syracuse rattled off 26 unanswered points before BC finally scored at the end there. Garrett Schrader, 21 of 27, 285 yards, 2 touchdowns. He threw for over 300 last week. So another good game for Schrader coming off injury. Emmett Moorhead was 29 of 38. 252 yards, 2 touchdowns for BC. Sean Tucker ends up with 125 yards on the day, 2 touchdowns, both in the fourth quarter, one a 5-yard run, the other a 29-yard run. Tucker's now the 3rd all-time leading rusher in Syracuse football history. And there's a question right there about Tucker's future. Will he be coming back to Syracuse next year? Highly doubt it. I think he's going to declare for the NFL draft. And will he play in the bowl game I think that's a question for some of those guys that are looking to take that next step. Michael Jones didn't play today due to a lower body injury, and Matthew Bergeron and some of these guys that are thinking about the next level and the next step. Some we know have declared for the NFL draft. Bergeron's playing in the Senior Bowl. He's all but gone. Andre Schmidt obviously has used his eligibility. I don't think he'll get drafted, but he'll be playing in the National Football League. I believe he did miss a kick in this game, though, but he's been invited to the Hula Bowl, the East-West Shrine Bowl, so he's right up there amongst the kickers that are coming out of college this year. So you got to wonder how many of these pro-eligible guys are going to skip the bowl game, if any. Maybe they all play in it, which would be great to see, but you're seeing more and more NFL level prospects that just aren't playing in bowl games at this point. I think Michael Jones will play in that bowl, frankly, if he's eligible for it health-wise, because that's why he came back. He flat out said that's why he came back, to help this team get to a bowl game. I can't imagine he'd skip it in that case. Just going through the stats, though, Cooper with 80 yards and a touchdown. Good to see him involved in his final regular season game. Aronde Gatson, 6 catches, 106 yards on the day. Damian Alford had that beautiful 58-yard touchdown from Schrader in the fourth quarter. He had 4 catches for 83 yards in this game. So all told, Syracuse had 443 total yards. That's kind of funny. That's the area code up at Syracuse, right? 443. Not the area code, but the prefix for all the numbers up at Syracuse, 443. 341 was the number for BC. Syracuse had 285 yards through the air, 158 on the ground. BC with 252 through the air. We mentioned the just ungodly number for the Orange, 14 penalties for 88 yards. Good gracious. That is crazy. 5 for 45 on the other end for Boston College. Let's see here. Just a couple more stats to throw at you here. Like we said, it was kind of a slog, kind of an ugly game for 3 quarters before Syracuse came around. The Orange just 3 of 10 on third down, for example. BC was 7 of 14 on third down, but 2 turnovers really cost Boston College, in particular, that fourth quarter fumble that Caleb Okechukwu caused. I would love the Holiday Bowl in San Diego, Jerry, going back to that bowl game conversation there. Love Fenway Park. I'm a Red Sox fan. Don't know if I want to go to Fenway Park in December. Would be cool to see a bowl game played there, much like the Pinstripe Bowl a couple of times for the Orange. Mike says Schrader still looked hurt. His mobility in the first 6 games completely different than it's been since the Florida State game. He's a step slow and can't make the same hard cuts. It's made everything harder on the rest of the offense. We brought that up, Michael. Chances this is the last game we see Tucker in a Syracuse uniform, I would put that at high. I don't know if he's going to, I mean, it's up to him if he wants to play in the bowl game, but certainly that would be his last game in a Syracuse uniform if he plays in that, because I think he's all but gone into the National Football League. Kevin says this was a completely different team than the 6-0 start. It was completely different in a couple of ways, Kevin. It was different in how they played. It was different by injury. Look, you have to mention the injuries as a factor down the stretch. It was brought up a minute ago. Schrader's mobility was limited. Tucker didn't get healthy till the final few games of the season. Offensive line, they show up last week at Wake Forest without Bergeron, with Kalen Ellis, who had to leave the game tonight, was obviously playing hurt down the stretch of the season. I think a lot of those offensive linemen were banged up. Obviously on defense, Mikel Jones out. Marlo Axe had to leave the game for a little bit. Thankfully, he came back for Syracuse because he made a huge 4th down play late in the game. Garrett Williams gets hurt, right? I'm forgetting some names here, some guys that went out for the year. Terry Lockett on defense, a couple of defensive linemen. Jaius Gear had to leave this game with injury. So they played different. They looked different, and injury was part of that. But injury is not the only excuse, right? There were some games down that stretch, that 5-game losing streak, near 6-game losing streak to end the season, that they should have won. And Wake Forest is one of them, by the way. Like, that's a game they should have won. And you can go through a couple more of those games. They just got outclassed by Notre Dame. They weren't going to win that game, right? And a couple other games down the stretch they just weren't in for whatever reason. But the Pittsburgh game is one they let go. Like, this should be an 8-win football team. It should have been Pittsburgh. Took care of business in this one and kind of got to 8 wins and have a shot to go for 9 in the bowl game, right? And then some of these conversations we're having, we're not. But they're 7-5, and they're going to a bowl game, and it's technically 2 games of progress. 13 starters in all, as Kevin notes here out. That's a lot. That's a lot, even for Syracuse, right? There's only so much depth that this team has. But again, that's a 7-year process that Dino Babers has had to build up depth, to figure out depth. They got to hit the portal hard. This recruiting class upcoming is really thin right now. The class of 2023 is highlighted by Lenora Sellers, the quarterback out of South Carolina. But this is not a team short on quarterbacks, believe it or not. I assume Schrader's coming back next year. He told us this past week he's all intending to come back next year. Justin Lamson comes off injury. Carlos Del Rio Wilson is on this team next year. I think he showed there's a lot of potential in his game. So I don't know if Sellers is going to have a shot to get in there and compete right away. This is a team that's got to build up its offensive and defensive line, find those skill guys. And yeah, the transfer portal's out there, but you can't completely rely on the portal to rebuild your team. And again, this recruiting class is like ranked 80th in the country. And it's really not anything to write home about at this point. They got some time, until signing day coming up in a couple of weeks to shore that up, right? There's early signing day that's in December, and then the February signing day on top of that. So they got some time, but right now this thing's not looking so good. And you got to build depth, as we saw. Every football team needs depth. This one in particular needs depth. This one in particular needs depth, given the rate of injuries that we have seen. All right, just going through some more of your comments here, guys. Steven noted that these guys had to be so tired and hurt, yet they made the plays to pull this game out. Look, they sucked it up in the fourth quarter. I will grant them that. They overcame, obviously, some chippiness, all the penalties, the undisciplined play. You got Cruz getting thrown out. The offense looks stale, particularly in the first quarter when, think about the first quarter. Garrett Schrader sacked 4 times. They had a punt blocked. They missed a field goal. And, Boston College missed a couple of field goals in that first half. So, it could have been 16-3 at halftime. It was 10-3 at halftime, and Syracuse rattled off 26 unanswered points, so they would have overcame that. But that was a terrible first quarter. They didn't really do much in the second half. I brought up, what happened in the second quarter, too, with that one drive. All the penalties killed that. Syracuse got within the 10-yard line, got in the red zone. Penalties knocked them back, and at one point knocked them even out of field goal range. They had so many darn penalties, but they overcame it in the fourth quarter, as Steven noted there. So you got to give them some credit for that. And at the very least, you're not talking about history. Syracuse did not make history tonight. They did not lose 6 in a row after winning 6 straight to start the game. They would have been just the third team to do that. And frankly, in 2011, when Ron Zook did that at Illinois in his 7th year, much like Dino's in his 7th year at Syracuse, they fired him. And he didn't even coach the bowl game. Jim Grobe did the same thing at Baylor, coming from Wake Forest in 2016. I remember Baylor was caught up in all the Art Briles nonsense and everything that happened there. But they did the same thing. They started in 2016. They started 6-0, finished 6-6, fired him. So if John Wildhack has got to be breathing the biggest sigh of relief out there tonight, because he doesn't have to do that. He doesn't have to face that. I'm sure there's still a bunch of Syracuse fans that are still riled up about the undisciplined play and some of the things we're seeing from this team. But there's no way John Wildhack's going to make a move now. There's no way you do that. 7-5 bowl bid. You would have to pay Dino $10 million to buy him out, as we've discussed. But you don't do that now. I mean, they got by the hair on their chinny chin chin. You're 6-6, having lost 6 in a row, on top of what the basketball team's looking like right now. I still think John Wildhack's got a lot of pressure on him in some other ways, but 7-5 with the chance to go 8-5 and win a bowl game, now you don't have to make that move. If they lost tonight, this would have been a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you, Rich. Appreciate that, my friend. Glad you're coming by. Appreciate the nice comments there. Danny brings up another good question. So this is, not just this game, guys. There's a lot of off-season questions to be answered, including this one. Is Tony White gone? I think he is. Now, I don't know where he would go, but I think Tony White's under some serious consideration. Now, is he going to leave to take another defensive coordinator job? I don't think so. Speaking of John Wildhack, he's got to ensure that's not the case. We're not privy to contract details at Syracuse, so I don't know what his contract says about out clauses. I know they're paying him as much as any defensive coordinator in the ACC. Tony White gets paid well, and I'm not sure exactly what it is because, again, we don't get to see the contracts. They're private at Syracuse, but you can't let that guy go. That's one of those guys you just cannot let go. Just based on, I know the defense wilted a little bit at the end of the year, but I think you could point at injury. I think Tony White is well liked. People like his system. He's a good recruiter. I talked to Caleb Okechukwu about Tony White earlier this week, Danny, and I just brought it up just generally. I said, is this a guy that's going to be a head coach someday? And Caleb just lit up, and he was like, I say that all the time. I say that around the team all the time. I say that to anybody that will listen. And I'm telling you now, that guy's going to be a head coach someday. So I think there's a chance there. What if Bronco Mendenhall gets back in the game and coaches somewhere and wants to bring back Robert and Jason Beck, right? There's going to be some things this team has got to do to shore up the coaching staff. We mentioned improve on recruiting, find some scores in the transfer portal, and keep the momentum going from what is technically an improvement, but they still, skidded down the hill at the end of the season, finishing 7-5 after a 6-0 start. Christopher says Dino's back, no doubt, but not counting coaches that move to better jobs. Think any are on the chopping block. You know what I think they've got to take a hard look at, Christopher, is the strength and conditioning coaches, which have been with Dino since Eastern Illinois. He is very loyal to them. But now, again, this is tough because football is football. You're going to get hurt. I'm not a doctor. I just play one here on the internet. But the rate of injuries this team has had, and I asked Dino about that at the press conference earlier this week. I said, and of course he deferred to, we'll look at everything after the season. But I asked specifically about strength and conditioning. And he did say that that's something they've got to look at. They've got to look at everything, but he acknowledged that. So I would be surprised if there weren't some changes either way. Coaches take other jobs or something of that nature. I think Mike Schmidt has to be looked at, and he's got a strong reputation as an offensive line coach. But even when that offensive line was healthy, how they wilted in the second half, failed to open up enough holes for Sean Tucker. They had to shift around a bunch of guys. And again, I know there were some injuries there, but the penalties that just did not improve. And the heart of that penalty problem was on the offensive line. So I think you got to take a hard look at that. But do I think there's going to be a lot of turnover? No, I don't. But I definitely think there'll be some changes. Tim just jumps in to say Arondé Gatson had an excellent season. What a breakout year for him. Syracuse found its true target. As Allison notes, ton of Syracuse fans at the game tonight. It was rocking there in Chestnut Hill. But to go back to what Tim said, Arondé Gatson, I've been saying for years that Syracuse has to throw the ball to the tight end. And by the time the season ended, who considers that guy a tight end? Right? He's just a great receiver. So I don't even put tight end next to him as his name anymore. But look, I liked what I saw from DeMarcus Adams at the end of the year. Damian Alford with the big touchdown catch. It felt like he was good for one big catch a game. Cooper came up big for this team at the end. I like that they spread the ball around more in general as the season kind of came down the hill here, and Schrader got back into it and had back-to-back games, one over 300 yards, this one nearly over 300 yards. And, I still think they got to look hard in the portal for some receivers, but it was encouraging to see some other guys get the ball down the stretch. Paul says, big relief for Dino to finish 7-5, even with a bowl game loss. He's guaranteed a winning season. At 6-6, a bowl game loss would make Wild Hack squirm. Well said there, Paul. That's the hair on their chinny chin they were dealing with there. Jerry says, got to get the boosters, alumni, and businesses to donate NIL money so Cuse can buy some of the players sitting on the benches of top teams around the country. Promise them playing time by platooning them in and out, kind of like a hockey system, like hockey lines. Get them in there, right? I mean, listen, Joel says they could see Colorado making a run at Tony White. Now, Tony is, to go back to him for a second, he, wants to be close to his mother who lives in the New York area. And I think by all accounts, he likes it here, but you never know who's going to come knocking. And he's high on that list of desired assistant coaches out there. So that is definitely something to keep an eye on here. Let's see here. Joel brings up a good point. If Anaya and Beck leave, Lenora Sellers is leaving with them. They did recruit him hard. They were recruiting him at Virginia before they came here. So something to keep an eye on. I don't think that they're gone. I don't think that that's a threat, but you got to keep a window open on all of this stuff, right? You just never know what's going to happen in the offseason here. Steve brings up a question. What 5 stars can we get with Adam Weissman's money? Yeah, the offer's out there. As of last time I checked on this, which was recently, within the last week or two, no football players have shown interest in Adam Weissman's $1 million offer. If you remember, the very visible Syracuse booster always sits right there behind Jim Boeheim at basketball games. Most people know who Adam Weissman is at this point. What was it, a couple months ago now, right? Put out the offer basically that, and you have to dance around NIL regulations and some of these things, but it was essentially he will give $1 million to a 5-star prospect, 1 for football, 1 for basketball. No one has bitten on the football end of it. I know a few 5 stars in basketball at the very least showed interest in pursuing the offer, but nothing out there yet. Football is the sport that needs. Not that basketball can't use the help right now, but football needs that high-impact 5-star guy. And that's only one position. You get a high-impact 5-star player in basketball, it can make your whole team. Football, you need 10 of them to really stand out, right? Like Alabama, that's just like, a Tuesday to get that many players to come in, right? Richard notes that South Carolina's coming after Sellers hard, and South Carolina beat Tennessee last week, and they beat Clemson today. So we'll see if he holds his commitment when signing day comes in a couple of weeks. I think he will, based on Anaya and Beck and the relationship there, but also something to keep an eye on here. You never know in recruiting until they sign right on that dotted line, right, friends? Scott says here, say what you want, but Syracuse played a very difficult schedule, as it turned out. Only really Virginia was a dud. Scott, if I'm not mistaken, I believe 10 out of Syracuse's 12 opponents, it could be 9. It's 9 or 10. Are going to a bowl game. Obviously, Wagner's not. Virginia was a dud. BC. So that's 3. So 9 out of 12 opponents are going to a bowl game that Syracuse faced this year. We knew it would be tough, and it was tough. We knew the back end of the schedule would be tough. It certainly was. Syracuse only won one of those games. But, look, now that the regular season's over and you start to reflect a little bit, I remember when that schedule came out in what was it, February? And I looked at it, and I think most of us looked at it and said, okay, you got 5 of your first 6 at home. The one road game is Connecticut, who Connecticut turned out to be a bowl team, by the way. But it said, just take care of business in those first 6 games, win 5 of 6, and you're home free. Well, they won 6. They made it really close, a razor's edge fight to the finish here to get that final win and get to, in this case, 7 wins. But to only get 1 win in your final 6 after winning your first 6, that's tough to swallow one way or the other, but they did it. And we all said if they get to 6 or 7 wins, technically that's improvement. That's a bowl game. But man, the way that they stumbled down the stretch, some of the issues they still have to address here, a couple of hard pills to swallow, particularly on the discipline front, right? A couple more from you guys, and then we'll wrap up for the evening. As Joel says here, with all the good defensive backs Dino Babers has produced at Syracuse, it's shocking that a 5-star DB wouldn't want to come here. But then again, every school recruits shut down cornerbacks hard. But you do bring up a good point. Syracuse has shown a path, Joel, to the National Football League for Ife Melifonwu, for Andre Sisco, for Trill Williams. Garrett Williams is going to be next on that list, I think, even with the injury. Frankly, I think Deuce Chestnut struggled with Zay Flowers tonight, but a lot of guys struggle with Zay Flowers. But Deuce has NFL potential. He's definitely going to round out his game next year, but I think we've certainly seen that potential from him, and that's a guy who's well on track to, I think, play in the NFL. This has become a DBU, all of a sudden. So, yeah, I think you are more in the conversation with some of these big-time shutdown corners than maybe you previously were, because you have shown a path to the National Football League with those guys, right? Paul says that the transfer portal is a zero-sum game for schools like Syracuse. For every good pickup, there'll be losses for some of those depth guys who feel they haven't been seeing the field enough. That's a great point, Paul, because the transfer portal swings both ways. Anthony Quealy has already announced he's going into the transfer portal. I don't want to speculate, but just look at some of those depth guys that didn't get the time, that feel like they can contribute somewhere else. Courtney Jackson's role, and again, I'm totally speculating here, but there's a guy whose numbers dropped a lot. Maybe if you're a freshman or a sophomore and you just don't see a future at your position, that's why it was critical to get LaQuinn Allen involved late in the year with Sean Tucker, certainly kind of taking the exit, I would believe, to the National Football League, but just to incorporate him more. And look, Syracuse, they've gone back and forth on this. Dino Babers actually talked about it recently. You can play more than one running back, even if your running back's a star, right? How many teams did Syracuse face down the stretch just pounded them because they had 2 or 3 different backs? Florida State, comes to mind. Pittsburgh comes to mind. They were missing their best running back, Abanikanda, and still ran all over Syracuse, right? Wake Forest was missing, didn't have a running game to write home about, and they still ran all over Syracuse, right? That 2-3 prong running attack, I think they need to do that. So we'll see how they do that going forward. And LaQuinn Allen certainly seems to be next in line, but I think they should have incorporated him much earlier into the season. That kid can play and get out there and can contribute. All right, what do you say we end there for this version of Syracuse football post game, just short of midnight here on the East Coast? Thanks for staying up late the past few weeks. By the way, if you are on the East Coast, the beauty of doing these shows on the internet is, it could be 8:57 where you are right now. It could be you could be watching in Hawaii. What time is it in Hawaii right now, right? So we get people from all over the place, all different time zones. But for me and for people on the East Coast, it's 3 weeks in a row. We've been up late, right, Steve? We've been up late these past few weeks. I'll sleep later because I got a lot of writing to do after this game. But let's just say I won't miss these late starts. We'll get a few in basketball, though. We'll get a few of those 9 o'clock starts. Those are the worst. But anyway, thanks for staying up late with us. Thanks for watching all season long because we're at the end of the regular season. How about that? We're almost done with football. I'm glad that we're not talking about the last game. We've got another game to talk about. We just don't know when it's going to be. We're awaiting Syracuse's bowl bid, I believe. You guys can double check me. I think the date is December 4th when they hand out the bowl bids after the college football playoff is determined and everything flows from there. But we'll know soon enough when Syracuse is playing in a bowl game, who they're playing and where, all the questions answered on that. But thanks for a great season coming by anyway, guys. We got one more of these to do after the bowl game. But thank you so much for being a part of these post-game shows. I really appreciate it. All the different start times and through the years and the loyalty and everybody that pops in here. I really enjoy chatting with you guys. And I can't wait. We'll end on Scott's note here. Can't wait for a bowl game, right? That is correct. But make sure you're coming by for basketball post-game shows. We're going to do a few more here in pre-conference play. We'll certainly be on Tuesday night after Syracuse plays Illinois. They play Notre Dame after that, continuing a tough stretch for hoops. We'll do a couple more in pre-conference play, and then for ACC play, we'll be on after every game. So some of these same bat channels here, just the Syracuse Orange Basketball Facebook page. But if you're watching on YouTube, watching on Twitter, same channels there. All this archives, by the way, on YouTube. We put the YouTube clip from these shows in my recap on syracuse.com. We fire it off on social media. So if you do miss the show live, certainly easy to catch up on it on your time when it's convenient for you. So we'll close this chapter of football, await the bowl game, and get more into basketball. And then before you know it, we'll be circling back here in a couple of weeks. So hope everybody had a terrific Thanksgiving. Hope everybody has the terrific rest of your weekend here. It was a really strange day, but as I look at the clock and it turns to midnight here, a new day has arrived, and maybe this is a day that Syracuse football won't fight everybody. What a day it was there. And good luck to Syracuse men's soccer, by the way, as they play Cornell in the NCAA tournament on Sunday. Have a great rest of your weekend, everybody. Thanks so much for watching Syracuse football postgame presented by Krause Health. We'll talk to you next